Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're strapping in for a time machine ride
Oh, wow.
back to January 20th, 2025.
Inauguration day.
Exactly, Inauguration Day.
Right.
We're not just watching the ceremony,
Right.
We're diving headfirst into that policy tsunami that hit in those first 24 hours.
Yeah, this was a day one blitz of executive orders and presidential actions.
Unprecedented.
Unlike anything we've seen recently, a clear attempt.
To reshape the political landscape.
Yes, especially when it comes to trade, national security.
And even the inner workings of the government.
That's right.
But lucky for us, we've got the original documents right here,
The real deal.
the actual memoranda, executive orders.
The proclamation
Consider this a behind-the-scenes look.
at how policy gets made.
Let's kick things off with trade because things got interesting right out of the gate.
Yeah.
The Presidential Memorandum on America First Trade Policy, it doesn't just tweak things around the edges, it throws the kitchen sink at the issue of trade deficits.
It really does. What's striking is how multi-pronged the approach is. It goes beyond just tariffs to investigate currency manipulation,
Right.
puts all existing trade agreements under review,
Wow.
and even considers targeting that $800 duty-free import exemption travelers enjoy.
So this signals a major shift in how the U.S. engages with global trade.
Massive.
And speaking of major shifts, we can't ignore the elephant, or rather the dragon in the room.
China.
Exactly. The memo specifically calls for reviewing the existing U.S.-China trade agreement, potentially adding more tariffs,
Oh, wow.
and launching investigations into intellectual property practices. Clearly, China is a focal point.
Absolutely. This suggests a continuation and potentially an escalation of the previous administration's approach to China.
Right.
It prioritizes bilateral negotiations
Mm-hmm.
and takes a more confrontational stance.
So what are the implications here?
Well, think about the implications for global supply chains.
Already strained.
Yes, already strained, and the potential for further tension in the U.S.-China relationship.
It's a big deal.
Huge.
Now hold on to your hats because we're shifting gears
Okay.
to national security,
Right.
where things get really intense.
Let's hear it.
The executive order on clarifying the military's role in protecting the territorial integrity of the United States
Okay, that's a mouthful.
is quite a mouthful, but the implications are pretty clear.
Yeah.
Sealing the borders is now U.S. Northcom's top priority,
And it's important for our listeners to understand that U.S. and NORTHCOM
right?
is the United States Northern Command, a unified combatant command responsible for defending the homeland
So
by making border security their top priority.
this order essentially militarizes the southern border response.
Exactly.
And it's not just about traditional military defense.
No.
The order focuses on repelling what it calls forms of invasion,
Right.
which includes not just drug trafficking, but also mass migration
Oh.
and even general criminal activity.
That's a key point. Lumping those together
Yeah.
broadens the scope of potential military involvement at the border significantly.
Significantly.
It also raises questions about how these different forms of invasion
Right.
will be defined and what level of force will be deemed appropriate in response.
And speaking of strong language, the proclamation declaring a national emergency at the southern border of the United States, it doesn't mince words.
No, it does not.
Phrases like sovereignty under attack, invasion,
Wow.
and cartels controlling territory.
Dramatic.
It paints a very dramatic picture.
The rhetoric is definitely noteworthy.
Yeah.
It frames the situation as an existential threat, justifying extraordinary measures.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the repeated use of the term invasion has a
Yeah.
very specific legal and historical weight,
Right.
potentially opening the door for a broader range of executive actions.
So the proclamation goes beyond just declaring an emergency.
Yeah, okay.
It actually invokes not just the National Emergencies Act, which allows presidents to exercise special powers during crises,
Right.
but also something called Title X authorities. This allows for the deployment of the military and even the potential construction of additional barriers along the border.
This raises significant questions about the balance of power between the executive branch and Congress.
Right.
By invoking Title X, the president is essentially claiming broad authority to act unilaterally in response to this declared emergency,
Wow.
potentially bypassing congressional oversight
Uh-huh.
and budgetary controls.
So it's a bold assertion of executive power,
Very bold.
from border walls to government shakeups.
All right.
This next set of actions takes us into the heart of power dynamics within the U.S. government itself.
Let's go.
The granting pardons and commutation of sentences proclamation. It's a big one. Full pardons. for anyone convicted in relation to January 6, 2021.
Wow, that's a sweeping use of presidential power.
Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This is a stark example of the power of the presidential pardon,
Right.
which allows a president to completely overturn the legal consequences of a conviction. In this case, it applies to a large group of individuals.
Right.
And will undoubtedly be viewed by many as politically motivated, given the events of January 6th.
Yeah, and the political maneuvering doesn't stop there.
Oh, boy.
The executive order holding former government officials accountable for election interference and improper disclosure of sensitive governmental information.
Okay.
It takes direct aim at specific individuals from the previous administration.
Revoking security clearances based on allegations of political actions is unprecedented.
It is.
This raises serious concerns about using national security mechanisms for partisan purposes.
Uh-huh.
Think about the potential chilling effect this could have on future government officials.
Right.
They might be less likely to express dissenting views for fear of retaliation.
Absolutely.
It sets a potentially dangerous precedent.
So the order specifically targets 51 former intelligence officials who signed a letter in 2020.
Okay.
Questioning the authenticity of a story about Hunter Biden's laptop. It seems clear that this administration is focused on holding those they perceive as political enemies accountable.
Yes, and it also highlights the inherent tension between national security and freedom of speech.
Right.
How do we balance the need to protect sensitive information with the right of individuals, even former government officials, to express their opinions,
Right.
especially on matters of public concern?
Yeah.
This order seems to tip the scales heavily in favor of security, with eventual consequences for open dialogue and dissent.
Then there's the memorandum to resolve the backlog of security clearances.
Okay.
On the surface, it sounds efficient, granting interim top-secret sensitive compartmented information, PSSCI clearances,
Yeah.
to a hand-picked list of personnel, bypassing the usual vetting process. But it also raises some red flags.
It does. This memorandum highlights the tension between expediency and due process.
Yeah.
Granting access to such highly classified information without the standard thorough background checks could have significant security implications. And the fact that the memorandum doesn't specify the criteria for selecting individuals for these expedited clearances just adds to the concern about potential favoritism and abuse.
So we've seen a flurry of actions
Yes.
aimed at reshaping trade, militarizing the border,
Right.
and targeting perceived political opponents.
It's a lot to process.
It is, and it certainly seems like a clear attempt to consolidate power and advance a specific agenda.
It does. What's the overall message here?
Oh, yeah.
These actions signal a decisive shift toward unilateralism and a willingness to utilize executive power to its fullest extent. The administration is clearly prioritizing national security, economic self-interest, and loyalty to the president above all else.
So what happens next?
Well, the long-term impact of these policies remains to be seen, but one thing is certain. The political landscape is being reshaped in a dramatic way.
Dramatic indeed.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how these day one actions weren't just focused domestically.
Right.
They also signal like a major shift
Yeah.
in how the U.S. engages with the rest of the world.
For sure.
Let's
Okay.
let's look at this executive order,
All right.
putting America first in international environmental agreements.
Okay.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty clear departure from global cooperation on climate change, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. The immediate withdrawal from the Paris Agreement is a big headline, but
Sure.
it's really just the tip of the iceberg here.
Okay.
What's truly significant is the dismantling of U.S. climate finance commitments
Wow.
and a clear shift in the focus of international energy agreements towards economic self-interest.
So it's not just about pulling out of agreements.
No.
It's about redefining the very nature
Right.
of U.S. participation
Exactly.
in global efforts to address climate change.
And this has potential ripple effects. It could undermine global efforts to address climate change and make it more difficult to reach international consensus on environmental issues moving forward.
So other countries
Yeah.
might be less willing to cooperate with the U.S. if they see us acting unilaterally.
Exactly. And this trend of unilateral action
Yeah.
isn't limited to just environmental issues either.
Right.
The executive order withdrawing the United States from the World Health Organization really drives that point home.
So while the withdrawal process was initiated previously,
Yes.
this order solidifies it, revokes previous pandemic response measures, and directs the administration to search for alternative partners.
This withdrawal from a key global health organization is a pretty clear signal of skepticism towards multilateral institutions.
Yes.
It raises questions about the U.S. commitment to global health security and its willingness to engage in cooperative efforts to address global challenges. Especially those that require international cooperation and coordination.
It's interesting because on one hand,
Yeah.
the administration seems to be arguing that these international organizations are ineffective
Right.
or even harmful to U.S. interests. But on the other hand, they're also taking actions, like with the trade memorandum,
Yeah.
that seem to invite even more international engagement,
Right.
albeit on a more bilateral basis.
It's a complex,
Right.
and some might say a contradictory approach.
Uh-huh.
It's too early to tell what the long-term implications will be,
Right.
but it certainly suggests a shift away from the traditional multilateral approach
Yeah.
to global engagement that has characterized U.S. foreign policy for decades.
So from trade to the environment to global health,
Yeah.
we're seeing a clear shift
Uh-huh.
in how the U.S. is engaging with the world.
Right.
Less multilateralism, more America first.
Exactly.
But what about on the home front?
Okay.
What happens inside the U.S. government as a result of these day one actions?
Well, that's where the executive order restoring accountability to policy influencing positions within the federal workforce comes in.
Okay.
This one brings back the controversial Schedule F,
Oh,
but with a new name,
all right.
Schedule Policy Career.
For those of us who might not remember,
Right.
remind us about Schedule F
Okay.
and why it was so controversial back in 2020.
So Schedule F was an attempt to reclassify certain federal employees
Okay.
who had policymaking or policy influencing roles.
Uh,
The goal was to make it easier to hire and fire these employees based on political alignment.
so rather than protecting them
Right.
through the civil service system.
Exactly. It was seen by many as an attempt to politicize the civil service
Right.
and undermine the merit-based system that has traditionally governed federal employment.
So it was ultimately
Yeah.
revoked by the Biden administration.
It was.
So this new order is essentially bringing it back.
Yes, but with some modifications.
Okay, what are those?
The most significant change is the explicit statement
Okay.
that employees in these positions are expected to faithfully implement administration policies. Failure to do so would be grounds for dismissal.
That sounds like a huge departure
It is.
from the traditional understanding of a nonpartisan civil service.
It really does. It seems to imply that loyalty to the administration's agenda
Right.
is now a primary qualification for holding certain government positions.
And this raises concerns
Yes.
about a more politicized
Right.
and less experienced federal workforce.
For sure, if implementing policies becomes more about loyalty than expertise, it could have a negative impact on the effectiveness and impartiality of government agencies.
We've covered a lot of ground already,
We have.
examining how these day one actions impacted everything, from global trade to the inner workings of the federal government.
It's a lot.
But there's one more area we need to delve into,
Okay.
the Second Amendment.
All right.
Stay with us as we explore how this policy blitz targeted gun rights in America.
This is a crucial part of the story,
Yes.
with potential ramifications for gun ownership and the ongoing debate surrounding the Second Amendment.
For sure.
It's an issue that always generates strong opinions and passionate debate,
All right.
and these executive actions are sure to add fuel to the fire.
All right, let's dive into this Second Amendment stuff.
Okay.
Because the executive order protecting the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, it might seem pretty straightforward at first glance, but
Yeah.
like a lot of what we see today, there's more to it than meets the eye.
It's true. The title itself suggests a strong affirmation of gun rights, but when you look closer, the order actually attempts to walk a tightrope,
Oh, really?
focusing on preventing gun violence while upholding Second Amendment rights.
So not a clear-cut,
Yeah. Right.
pro-gun or anti-gun stance.
Exactly.
It seems like the administration is trying to find a middle ground
Yes,
on an issue that's deeply divisive
for sure.
in American society.
And that's what makes this order so fascinating.
Oh,
It reflects the ongoing struggle to balance the right to bear arms with the need to protect public safety.
right. A debate that has raged for decades.
It has.
And this order is unlikely to settle it.
Probably not.
So what are some of the specific actions laid out in the order?
Well, it directs the Attorney General to prioritize the prosecution of gun crimes, particularly those involving illegal firearms trafficking. It also calls for increased funding for things like school safety measures
Right.
and programs aimed at preventing youth violence.
So these are measures that
Yeah.
enjoy fairly broad public support.
They do. They sound like common sense steps to address gun violence without infringing on the rights of law-abiding citizens.
But I imagine there are also some more controversial
Oh, yeah.
elements to the order.
There are. One of the most contentious provisions
Okay.
is a directive to explore the feasibility of a national red flag law.
Ah, yes, red flag laws.
Right.
Those have been a hot-button issue for years.
For sure.
Can you remind us
Okay.
what they are and why they're so controversial?
So red flag laws allow law enforcement to temporarily remove firearms from individuals who are deemed a danger to themselves or others.
Okay.
Usually based on evidence presented by family members or law enforcement. Supporters argue they're a vital tool for preventing mass shootings and suicides.
Great.
But opponents view them as a violation of due process rights and an infringement on Second Amendment rights.
It seems like even in an area as seemingly straightforward as the Second Amendment,
Yeah.
this administration is finding ways
Right.
to generate both consensus and controversy.
It's a testament to the deep divisions in American society over gun control.
Yeah.
This order, much like many of the others we've discussed today, is likely to face legal challenges and strong opposition from groups on both sides of the issue.
So there you have it. A day that shook up trade, national security, the structure of the federal government,
Wow.
America's place on the global stage,
It's a lot.
and even the Second Amendment.
Incredible.
It's been quite a journey unpacking all of this.
It has been indeed. These actions represent a bold and some might say a radical attempt to reshape the political landscape
Right.
and advance a very specific vision for America.
A lot to think about, for sure. We've just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
But hopefully, this deep dive has provided you with some valuable insights
Right.
into the complexities of these day one actions and their potential ramifications.
Remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to understanding the forces shaping our world.
Absolutely.
We encourage you to continue exploring these issues,
Right.
challenge assumptions, and seek out diverse perspectives.
And who knows?
Right.
Maybe one day you'll be the expert,
Yeah,
guiding someone else through a deep dive of their own.
that would be great.
Until then, stay curious, stay informed,
Yes.
and keep diving deep.